Hi, welcome to Pharmacy Study Buddy. My name is Jess and I'm a newly qualified pharmacist. So this video is going to be all about my top tips, so to speak, on how to successfully go through your pre-reg year. So like I say, I'm a newly qualified pharmacist, so I've just done my pre-reg year. So I feel like I'm pretty well equipped to give you some tips on how to successfully navigate it. I will keep looking off camera because this is going to be a long video, just warning you now. And I've made notes for myself, so that's why I just keep looking over there. So the way I'm going to divide the video up is into a sort of timeline. So going from your sort of first month, your first 3 months, some general tips throughout pre-reg, and then what to do in sort of, well, what I would suggest to do in the last 6 months, and then the very last month leading up to the exam. So we'll start at the beginning. That's a good place to start. During the first month, I would suggest that this should be used as more of your settling in period. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to try and hit the ground running. It's going to be a big change from undergrad, and you want to focus more at this point on just getting used to what you're going to be doing day to day, who you're going to be working with, and really building that rapport with your pre-reg tutor, because they are going to be the one that you're sort of relying on throughout the year, and you need to be able to communicate well with them. You also want to really familiarise yourself with the pre-reg manual. So this is available online. I would suggest that you go and take a really good look at that, see exactly what you're expected to do throughout the pre-reg year. I will put a link to that in the description box. I will also put a link to the GPHC's key dates webpage. So this will have dates such as when the exam actually is, but also deadlines on when you need to submit your application by, things like that, because you will need to actually apply to sit the exam. That is something that is very important. If you don't apply correctly and within the correct time, you won't be able to sit the June exam. You'll have to wait until the September one. So it's something that you need to make sure you're on top of. You also want to make sure you know when your week 13, 26 and 39 reviews are going to be. These are sort of your key reflection points throughout the year, and you need to pass your reviews with your tutor at those stages. They need to sign you off. If they don't sign you off, like they don't think that you're progressing at the level that you should be, then you won't be allowed to sit the exam. So make sure you, like I say, that you go through the pre-reg manual, see exactly what's expected of you, and that you're meeting your targets that you've addressed with your tutor. So as part of this settling in period, like I say, you want to build that rapport with your tutor, but you also want to manage your expectations. You need to have that discussion with your tutor about what they expect from you, and just manage what you're expecting them to be able to do for you. This year is going to be much more about you standing on your own 2 feet. There is a lot of support available, don't get me wrong, but in the first instance, you should always try and solve a problem yourself before you go to someone else for it. Just because the way it's working, your tutor, that is not their only job. They are doing that in addition to all of their normal daily tasks. So they won't necessarily always have the time available for you that you would like them to. So that's just something to bear in mind. Also, something to establish very early on is your study time. So this varies a lot depending on where you work. The GPHC actually recommends in the pre-reg manual that a pre-reg gets 4 hours of study time per week, but this is just a recommendation. The GPHC does not enforce this on your pre-reg place. So you need to have that conversation with your tutor and potentially with your superintendent or whoever it is that deals with that sort of thing, because your tutor might not be in control of it. You need to have that conversation and work out how much weekly study time you're actually going to be allowed. Some places are much better than others. I've heard students during my time at pre-reg where they had like a whole afternoon available for study time. Personally, I only had an hour per week and I had to fight for that hour per week. So it will vary from placement to placement. Another thing I would suggest to do very early on is to plan your holidays. This might seem a little bit odd to be planning them this early, but the reason I suggest that is because you will only have a limited number of holiday days that you can actually take, and you don't want to take them too early or throughout the year and then not have enough time left over near the exam to actually revise for it. Some places may allow unpaid leave up to the exam, other places won't, so you need to bear that in mind. Personally, I took off the week before the exam and the week of the exam. So I held those holiday days back so that I knew I would have them at that point in the year. Another thing I would suggest to do is to get RPS membership. Now this is something that's paid, and I don't normally like to recommend Pre-Reg paying for things because I think there's a lot of organisations out there that are trying to make money out of you. But RPS membership does make it worth it for what you actually get for your money, in my opinion. So you will get a BNF, you'll get a BNFC, you also get the most recent copy of the MEP, and my favourite thing from that membership is actually you get 30 days free access to their online programme, or online website rather, called On Track. Now this is basically a GPH style question bank, and I used this so much in the lead up to the exam. And of course it also allows you access to their revision weekends and the mock exams, things like that, if that's something that you want to do. I do stress though that it allows you access to them. It's not free, so you have to be an RPS member to be able to do them, but you still have to pay for them. So that is something to bear in mind. Another thing to bear in mind is indemnity insurance. Obviously it is a very busy environment. We're all human, we make mistakes. Indemnity insurance will help protect you if you do make a mistake. Another thing I would recommend doing is just make sure you're signed up to the BPSA graduate membership. So I was a BPSA member throughout my student years, and then I just made sure I continued it in Pre-Reg just so I had access to the materials that they provide. So even though that is the first month, and I did say don't be worried about hitting the ground running, in terms of revision, there will still be a lot to do in order to settle in and make sure you're sort of up to speed on what you need to do over the coming year. So then during the next few months after that initial period, I would suggest that you start some focused revision. So this doesn't mean create a really comprehensive timetable and then go through every section in turn. That's something you can do later on. What I mean at the minute is if there's areas that are coming up in your day-to-day practice that you think, oh, hang on a minute, I don't know as much about that as I'd like to, or as I should, then jot it down and make sure you go over it within a reasonable period of time. So what I did is I kept a notebook on me, and I would write down anything throughout the day that I knew I needed to look up later, things that I didn't have time to do then and there. So for example, if there was a drug I came across that I wasn't familiar with, but at the time the pharmacy was really busy, so I wouldn't have had a chance to just go and get the BNF out, because the other staff members might have been looking at me a bit oddly and been like, what are you doing? There's more important things to do right now. So just keep a note of them and address them as you go. Another thing I would suggest doing is, like I said, during the first month, make sure you familiarise yourself with the Pre-Reg manual. In there you have 76 competencies, or performance standards rather, that you need to show that you meet throughout the year. I would set yourself a deadline for completing those. I would set the deadline a bit before the exam as well. It just gives you a bit more freedom during those last months to actually focus on revision, more than your time being taken away to try and write up evidences for your competencies instead. So yeah, with the competencies, there's going to be ones that are easier to write up, and then there's going to be other ones. Mostly for me it was section C that actually you find that you can gather the evidence for a bit more into Pre-Reg. So section A, things more on your personal skills, are generally quite easy to write up early on, so you can focus on those, get those ones out of the way, show your progression with those ones instead, and then focus on the other ones a bit later. But it's up to you. As long as you have a plan of how you want to address them, just go with that. Because if you do it haphazardly, you're going to find that near the end you've got a load of fiddly ones that you don't really know how to write up or gather evidence for. I already mentioned the RPS membership and about becoming a member of that, but another thing that I would recommend doing is to sign up for their alerts, and they just let you know about changes that are happening in the world of pharmacy, and just help you to keep up to date. Also the MHRA alerts, which you can sign up through the government website, I would recommend doing that, just because if there's any product recalls you get the emails for it, and that can be quite useful. And actually social media, even though social media and study don't always go hand in hand, in this case I found that it's actually really helpful for pre-reg, because if you sign up, especially to pharmacy Twitter, I'm going to call it, it really helps you to stay up to date with what's going on. All of the pharmacy news is sort of shared between professionals on Twitter. So about halfway through Pre-Reg, I personally experienced a bit of a dip in my motivation. You need to make sure you're taking time for yourself, make sure you're taking regular breaks, make sure you maintain a hobby if you have one. If you don't have a hobby, take up a hobby, because otherwise everything is just going to be about pharmacy and it will just drive you mad. Like literally, trust me. So make sure you have something else going on that you can just have sort of as protected time. Like you don't have to think about pharmacy, you have something else that you're doing. And that could be anything. Like if knitting is your thing, then take up a knitting class or something. Yeah, that's probably not a very relevant example for most of you, but whatever your hobby happens to be. What I would recommend as well is, if you haven't already by this point, take a look at some SPCs. So these are summaries of product characteristics. So you can find them on the Electronic Medicines Compendium, which is a website. If you haven't already been on it, definitely take a look at that. Just have a look at some random SPCs, for example, atorvastatin 20s, bisoprolol 2.5s, whatever. Just type in a drug that you know of and have a look through its SPC. Because for the exam, you need to know the structure of those inside out. You don't need to know them for every individual drug, but you need to know the structure of them in terms of where to find a bit of information if you need it. So for example, knowing where to find the side effects, or knowing where to find the list of excipients. Knowing where to find that information is the important part, because it will save you so much time in the exam and you do not have time to waste. So any way that you can reduce the time taken to find a bit of information that you need when you're using your extracts is going to help you in the long term. So getting that sorted early on is great. So that leads us into the second half of the year, or the final 6 months. I would strongly recommend that at this point you start making a more structured timetable for yourself in terms of a revision plan. Now, you may be someone who doesn't really like planning, in which case you've got to do what works for you, but I would recommend that you try it, because as you would have noticed from the Pre-Reg manual, there are a list of topics that you need to know about, and they have different weightings. So there's the high, medium and low weighted topics, and you want to pay more attention, give more time to the high weighted topics, and creating a plan for that just allows you to really focus that revision and know which bits you've covered and which bits you haven't covered in enough detail yet. So you have to remember that this exam is not just testing you on your pre-reg year, it's not just testing you on your knowledge of the BNF, it is testing you on everything you learn at undergrad. And I mean everything. In my pre-reg exam, I can't tell you the exact question I'm going to talk about just because of copyright, but in the pre-reg exam that I took, paper 2 contained a question about probability values. Now this actually threw a lot of students. When I was talking to them afterwards, they were like, I didn't know the answer to that question, I didn't realise that would even come up. But that is something that was covered at undergrad, so that just goes to show they can test on anything. Now, would those people have been better off spending an hour revising probability values instead of doing, for example, the cardiovascular system? No, they wouldn't have been. Cardiovascular system's a high weighted area, and you're never going to be able to go over all the tiny bits of information that might possibly come up. You need to focus on big wins rather than fiddly facts. Another thing to do, if you haven't already by this point, is join things like WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups for pre-reg support. I joined them at the beginning of the year, but I didn't actually find them useful until more midway through. If anything, I kind of just ignored them for the first half of pre-reg because I found that people were sort of panicking each other more than helping in some cases, because obviously you're comparing against what other people are doing, and if people have started revising already, you're like, oh, I should be revising too. But actually that's not necessarily the case, and if you try to do too much too soon with pre-reg, you will end up burning out before you even get to the exam, and that's definitely not something that you want to do. Other resources are obviously around as well in terms of mock exams, revision weekends. A lot of organisations are out there that put on events like those. Not many of them are free, most of them are paid for, and you'll have to make up your own mind about which ones you think are worth attending, if any, because you don't have to attend them. It's not a case of, if I don't attend these events then there's no way that I'm going to pass the pre-reg exam. That's not the case at all. You can pass the pre-reg exam by yourself. You don't need to attend these events. They can just help you along the way. For example, I attended the RPS revision weekend, I think it was in about February, March time, something like that, and that really helped to focus my revision, know what areas I needed to put more attention to, and also it got some of my common mistakes out of the way quite early on, so that when I then took other mock exams and revision sessions and things later on, I'd already made those mistakes. I already knew where I went wrong on that, and I was able to get that question right, and every little improvement like that is going to help. But another thing, the events like the RPS revision weekend and mock exams, things like that, what they really help to do is to improve your confidence, and that's something that personally I felt I really needed for the exam, because I didn't want to go in there and just keep second guessing myself. I wanted to go in there and just get on with it, know that I had prepared as much as I possibly could and just get it done. And I found that the events I attended did really help with that. Another thing I would suggest doing at the midway point is to start doing practice questions. This can be from mocks, or it can be from websites. You can make up your own, you can do it with peers, whatever works for you. Personally, as I've mentioned before, the On-Track website from the RPS was immensely helpful. You only get 30 days free access with that, but you can use your 30 days free access as a sort of discount if you wanted to buy more time, so you could even get several months worth, which is what I ended up doing. But anyway, I would definitely recommend doing something like that. The benefit of On-Track is that you can do question sets in the style of the GPHC exam. That meant I was able to build those questions into my day, and I would aim to do that every working day, and that process of doing it little and often really built up my clinical knowledge ready for the exam. And obviously in the sort of final leg, as it were, I would suggest making notes for yourself. So really summarise areas of the BNF, the MEP for example, so that when it's in that last month leading up to the exam, you've got those as reference to go over. Now they could be paper notes, electronic notes, sticky notes, whatever works for you, just as long as you have some sort of reference to use later on. Okay, and then in the final month for the exam, you want to use that time that you saved or that you booked off to really focus your revision. Use those summary notes that you made before, use the resources that you have available to you, use your peers if they're available to have study sessions with. Peer learning is a great way to learn. You can really tell if you understand something if you're able to teach it to someone else. It's a great way of identifying the gaps in your knowledge. So obviously by this point you've already gone through 4 years of undergraduate. You know what kind of study works best for you. So use that knowledge and just do the best you can. And the final month before the exam is obviously going to be very stressful. Everyone deals with stress in different ways, but this is a big exam. So just make sure you utilise your support networks that you have available to you. There's Pharmacist Support, an organisation that has a service called Listening Friends. So if you're really stressed out and you feel like you don't have someone to talk to in your life who understands, you can just call up that line. It's completely anonymous and someone will just listen to you and help you through it. It is literally a listening friend. It's a great service and I would highly recommend using it if you feel like you need it. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video. So in summary, what I would say is my 5 top tips are: use your time wisely. You have a year, it is going to go very quickly, so make sure you use that time the best you can. 2, be proactive. So use the opportunities that you have throughout Pre-Reg. Study whenever you can at work, so really use that active learning. So if there's a problem or area you have identified that you don't know as much about as you'd like to, try and do it there and then, because it will stick in your head so much more than if you do it later just reading from a book or from online or wherever. Tip 3, one thing at a time. Now what I mean by this is pharmacy can be a very stressful environment, it's a very busy environment, but you need to keep a cool head, because if you don't, then you will end up making mistakes. So just focus on one thing at a time. What's the most important thing you need to do right now? Right, do that one thing, then move on to the next thing. If your brain is thinking about 5 different things at once, none of them are getting your full attention. Okay, so 4. Look after yourself. I hope I've stressed that point enough during this video, but if I haven't, here it is again. Look after yourself. Self-care is so important, particularly during your pre-reg. It is going to be a great year, but it's going to be a busy and a stressful year. So like I say, make sure you look after yourself, make sure you utilise those support networks that you have available to you. And top tip 5, reflect. Like, if you don't reflect on your current practice, your previous practice, how are you ever going to improve? You need to identify what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And that is no more true than it is during pre-reg. You have a lot to learn. You're at the beginning of your proper practical professional career, and this is really the time to get those early mistakes out of the way. You will make mistakes, that's part of pre-reg. The important thing is learning from them. And finally, the saying is very true: fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So I don't want to panic anyone. Like, yes, there's going to be a lot to learn, there's a lot to do throughout pre-reg, but you have time, and once you break it down, you have a whole year to cover that. So as long as you do it bit by bit, don't leave it all to the end, and you'll be okay. The year will seem to fly by, you will be very busy. So make the most of it, make the most of the opportunities you have available to you. And good luck!